Welcome everybody. Josh on the wrong lead with another video in our Horseplayer 101 kind of series here. We've done a ton of videos on this. We've kind of gone back and forth on stuff, and it's been a while since we've updated a couple of these things. But this is something actually in the Discord, the horse racing Discord on from Reddit. Had a couple people ask me about this, and they specifically about physical handicapping, and I could think of nobody better but my friend Miss Kaitlin Free. How are you doing, Kaitlin?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. We're recording this. This is obviously going to be, up and probably watched for the next, year or two, or whatever. But obviously, we're in the heat of the Keeneland meet right before Breeders' Cup, and I thought this would be a good time to kind of, talk about this, especially because I have actually a really good story about physical handicapping that was completely accidental from last year's Breeders' Cup. I was lucky enough to get a paddock pass for the juvenile turf on Friday, which is the last race on Friday at Keeneland. And I was sitting in a paddock and I'm just looking at the horses, and I don't know horse flesh. I'm a horse player. I need to see the form. I need to see all this stuff. And I'm just sitting there. I'm looking at the form. I'm looking at the horses kind of walk by. I remember this race because I really, really liked a Wayne Catalano horse, and the winner is coming into
Yeah.
this race. Joel Rosario was aboard, and I thought that this horse was the best of the American group. And I was really looking forward to betting that horse. And so I'm sitting there, I'm looking at him, looking at these horses walk by. Obviously, we had all of the horses come from across the pond. We had a Charles Appleby horse, Silver Knot, who ended up going off as your 3-1 favorite. Looked pretty good in the paddock. And all of a sudden, this horse just walks by, and I'm just like, what? Like, and I just couldn't take my eyes off this horse. This horse was just like, it was beautiful. It was just nice. I mean, just, I don't know. It was a horse, and like I had a really hard time putting it into words. But I'm like, man, this horse just looks impressive. And so I go upstairs. I was sitting in the saddling paddock pavilion or whatever it's called, and we Caleb and I were sitting at a table with um, uh, two couples that owned horses, and one of the women goes, "Did you see that one horse?" And she literally hits me, and I was like, "Yeah, like absolutely, that horse looked great." And that ended up being Victoria Road, who won at 8-1 on the day. And I put a large win bet on it because I was like, this horse looks great. Like I have never seen a horse like this. And I go upstairs, and the people we're sitting with, they're like, hey, like this horse looks good too, right? Like they agreed with me. And so yeah, 8-1. And sometimes with these horses coming from overseas, right? Form carries, sometimes it doesn't. But
Mhm.
hey, I saw this horse in the flesh, and I was just taken aback, and I made a large win bet and got myself out of a hole on Friday. So that was pretty nice. But yeah, but Kaitlin, like, I couldn't explain what I saw. I just saw a horse, and I'm just like, if you had a picture of a horse in the dictionary, that's what this is. Very very simple brain there. But maybe you can kind of put it into words a little bit of maybe what I saw. I know you were there that day as well. We
Mhm.
hung out most of that weekend, so maybe kind of just start on kind of an overall basis of maybe what you're kind of looking for.
It's definitely hard to tell, as you mentioned, with some of those horses coming in from overseas. And first of all, what a great price to get on an Aidan O'Brien trainee at 8-1 in a Breeders' Cup race. You never see that happen.
Hmm.
And that's a race he's won multiple times. So that was something that was just interesting to me because I kind of thought the same thing. He's a horse that is just so physically impressive. And one thing that I really think about him specifically is he was kind of uncharacteristic of some of the Aidan O'Brien runners. I think it's maybe because his breeding was a little bit different because a lot of those Aidan O'Brien runners are from the Galileo line that typically it's very normal for them to wash out and look very hot and act up a little bit before they run. That's just their typical demeanor. But his breeding's a little bit different. He was much more of a more relaxed horse. He had a great coat, great skin on him. And really what you want to see with a horse like that is a horse that owns the paddock. Their neck is bowed. They just look very comfortable in their own skin. They're not agitated about anything. They're in their own world. Essentially, there's no outside stimuli that are really bothering them. I mean, their ears might flick back and forth as they hear noises, but they're not, turning to look and like losing focus of the task they have at hand. You just know that this horse is focused. Zenyatta was one that exemplified it a lot. They kind of do the foot movements too. Sometimes they will prance or trot a little bit. Zenyatta, of course, had her dance, but she was the type of horse that I think of when a horse just knew its job. It just kind of had that mental type of toughness where a horse is not going to necessarily be able to fall apart in a paddock, or the outside stimuli aren't going to affect them as much. And you couple that with good physical looks, a good coat. And a lot of people say, a horse has dapples or they have a shiny coat. It goes deeper than that because you kind of have to pair that with the mental aspects, and you really have to kind of look at the eyes and look at the ears and just kind of see what those type of deeper senses are doing with a horse. But if you put all of those together, you kind of really get the total package, and that's what you're looking for. And it's so rare to see a horse from that barn, especially, and just overall coming in from Europe, not having had experience here in the United States, and just turning out that nice.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was really hard to describe. I just remember the horse walking past, and like you're like, oh, like that's your winner. Like
Yeah.
and that's literally the only time I've ever experienced something like that. When I first started going to the track, my brother had a couple of friends who we would meet up at the track with, and they're old school handicappers, right? They only use the equibase program. They go to the paddock, and like their big thing was the kidney sweat.
Yeah.
They would always look for the kidney sweat, and like it was always funny because I would never go to the paddock, and I would pick a horse out, and they'd be like, "Oh, your horse is sweating," right? And like they would just like hate the horse, and then like, of course, if it won, right, they'd be like, "I can't believe that sweaty horse won," and everything. But I guess talking about the negative side there a little bit. What are a couple of things maybe that you look for that maybe downgrades a horse a little bit for you?
I will say when a horse is sweating, a lot of it depends on the temperature and what else the horse is doing. If it's 50 degrees and a horse, you're seeing like the whites of their eyes and they're sweating, that's definitely not a good sign. But if horses are sweating on an 80-degree day, I think that's totally normal as long as it's not, to excess, because the first place a horse is going to sweat is the inside of their legs and what you call kidney sweat. A lot of horses typically have that. The next would be kind of like the lathery type on the neck. Usually when horses are out on the track, sometimes you'll see that kind of like with the reins and where the jockey has their gloves and has their hands. And then sometimes you'll see it on their midsection as well, which those would be the 3 steps. The kidney sweat doesn't bother me necessarily, but if they're washing out in other ways, then I would say maybe. But really what you have to look at, especially if you've seen the horse multiple times, is what's normal for that horse. I touched on a little bit with some of those Aidan O'Brien runners. 2 examples I can think of off the top of my head are Highland Rio and Mogul. Those were 2 very hot-blooded horses that no matter what, they always washed out before every single race. They always were covered in lather, whether it be between their legs, on their necks, just everywhere. They always got very hot and were a little bit agitated when they got close to the gate, but that was their amped up, that was their normal. So you have to know kind of what normal is for a horse. And I think that's kind of why it's important, with people that are involved in these circuits constantly, or trainers or people that are in the paddock that know these horses, to say, hey, I've seen this horse before. He always looks like this and he always still runs well. Like there's a horse I can think of. His name's not off the top of my head, but he was a gray horse that won at Churchill this past meet. He took money, but his coat was very dull. He was missing patches of hair. He just overall wasn't a grooming thing. It just was his coat and just his skin and the way it looked. And gray horses are kind of a little bit harder to decipher. They don't show dapples, in their coat obviously shows way more because of the lighter complexion. But I just overall was like, ooh, might want to stay away from that one. The horse won. So, but that was his normal. That was something that he was used to being. So really, a lot of the red flags for me when you're looking at a horse physically, when it comes to, their coat, their skin, what they look like if they're lathering, the way they're walking, if they're walking gingerly, or if something has changed with the way they're doing their footwork. If the horse was like that before, then it's probably no cause for worry. But if the horse has looked really good in the past, they have a really nice even gait previously, and now something is just off, that's when you know something's off.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see this a lot with not necessarily with the way a horse is built or the way a horse looks, but the way a horse moves.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes like you just have some really just awful movers. They got that
Yeah.
paddle action. They look bad, but like that's just how they run, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, they might be an ugly runner, but they might still be fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely very important. And I know other paddock analysts, if you watch anything on Naira, they talk about that all the time. You have to know the horse's baseline a little bit
Mhm.
as well if you're going to, start comparing like, hey, this horse doesn't look great today because maybe that's just that horse is normal.
Yeah.
Or, hey, sometimes you got horses that, look like $1 million and, they also don't run a step. But I know you said, we were talking a little bit before, you had maybe one or two horses that ran this last meet that maybe were just good horses visually that kind of ended up running well. I don't know if you got any examples.
One added example, and she actually just ran at Keeneland the other day. She didn't run well. I kind of maybe suspect that she bled in that race. It's actually Almond Fudge. She won a main special weight on Saturday. September 16th was the first race, 7-1, Fausto Gutierrez, Gerardo Corrales. She looked like $1 million in the paddock, and you could tell that when she was in the paddock, she kind of had this alpha female type of a presence. She looked in charge. She was well turned out physically. The way her mind was working, she wasn't, kind of looking everywhere, because horses have different types of vision than we do. We can kind of see everything around us in like a sphere type shape. Horses have eyes on both sides of their heads, so they're not able to get that full 360 or 180 type of a vision. So if they really, need to investigate what is going on, because they're curious animals, they're fight or flight type of animals, they're prey animals, their ears will respond to the stimuli first. So if they hear something that they're curious, an ear will go like this, and if they need to investigate it further, they'll both go like this. And then, if they're really freaked out, sometimes they'll give it the eye, and if they're really freaked out, they'll turn their heads. Her ears were playing around just a little bit and stuff, but I mean, she was very much on business. There wasn't much going on with her. But I will say, though, some of the 2-year-old groups that we did see at Churchill, and I don't know if it's because of the smaller type of paddock with some more cramped up space, we had some bad groups of 2-year-olds, some really bad actors, whether it be fillies, colts, what have you. She was one of the best acting 2-year-olds I've seen. And I mean, physically about her, something I really look for in a 2-year-old is not a big, gangly looking type of a juvenile that looks like their body still needs to catch up to them. This point in time, I'm looking for more of kind of a compact 2-year-old. I don't mind if they're a little bit smaller, but their body has caught up to their size, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Their legs aren't too long. They're not underweight. Their head just looks big. They still are well proportioned, even though they still have room to grow. Their body is proportionate to their structure.
Yeah. And I guess the last question before we kind of wrap up, and this is something that, I never really understand, right? But I know, like I said, you watch the Naira cast, you watch Fox, you watch Churchill Downs, and they talk about a horse. Oh, this looks like a turf horse. Oh, this looks like a dirt horse. Like briefly, like what is the difference there?
I think a lot of it kind of has to do with body style and almost the way they run. A lot of horses that will run on turf, I think, are kind of more like a stockier type of a horse. They have high knee action. You'll kind of see it in horses that run on the dirt that have previously ran on the turf. They're running like this, not necessarily swimming or anything. They just have very high knee action because they're used to the absorption that comes from the turf, and that's just how they run. Sometimes if you see a horse running like that on the dirt that's struggling, that's maybe indicative that they need to get on the grass. Dirt horses, to me, sometimes can be a little bit more long and scopy type. Their feet kind of strike out a little bit more. They're not lifting their feet up as much, and they just kind of glide across the dirt and kind of help the dirt carry them a little bit. That would really be my only two discrepancies between the two. But I'd say the biggest factor is kind of the way they do their front legs. The very high knee action is very indicative of a horse that's going to be good on turf.
Gotcha. So I guess just to summarize, right? You go on to the paddock, you're looking at horses, right? You're looking for a horse, coat looks good, right? Horse isn't acting up in the pack, like looks. I guess for me, I always say professional, right? Like
Mhm.
the horse, like he's been there before. You know, maybe walking around with a little bit of attitude, but not necessarily acting up or
Right.
doing anything. And you know, if it's hot out and the horse is sweating, whatever. But if it is cooler and you see it, you're trying to make sure the horse isn't kind of working himself up into like a
Right.
lather, and it's just kind of calm and collected before the race.
Yeah, and I think so much of it has to do with a lot of the sensory type of things, more so than maybe even some of the body type stuff. It always concerns me when I see a horse that maybe just kind of looks like they could jump out of their skin any moment in like a bad way. You can see like the whites of their eyes. You can tell the difference between a horse that means business and a horse that is anxious or scared, based on the way their eyes look, the way their ears move. They react faster to stimuli if they're a little bit more anxious or a little bit fearful, versus a horse that's really comfortable in their situation but is really focused on the task at hand. They have a more determined type of a look, versus a look where they could bolt at any type of a second.
Cool. Well, Kaitlin, thank you so much. I know people can find you at Kaitlin E Free on Twitter. Obviously, you're doing the Churchill simulcast out there in the paddock. And yeah, thank you for taking so much time out of your day here and recording this with me.
Absolutely. We can dive deeper next time, whatever you want to do.
Awesome. Thanks.